The autumn wind swept through the hills of upstate New York with an unusual intensity that October night. The Moretti mansion stood like a fortress against the darkening sky, its white columns gleaming under the security lights that dotted the sprawling property. Inside, the crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors that had witnessed decades of whispered deals and blood-soaked secrets. Clara Dawson moved through the service corridors with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to exist in the margins. At 32, she had worked for the Moretti family for 6 years, long enough to understand the unspoken rules, short enough to still feel the weight of them. Her uniform was pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her hands carried the faint scent of lemon polish from the afternoon's work. She had just finished organizing the linens in the West Wing storage room when she smelled it. At first it was subtle, a hint of something acrid mixing with the usual smell of expensive wood and leather. Clara paused, her hand hovering over a stack of Egyptian cotton sheets. Her heart began to beat faster, an instinctive alarm that preceded conscious understanding. She stepped into the hallway, and that's when she saw the thin line of smoke curling from beneath the door of the main study. "Fire," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. The mansion erupted into chaos within minutes. Somewhere on the first floor, an alarm began shrieking, its electronic wail cutting through the night. Clara heard the thundering of boots as security guards mobilized, their voices sharp with urgency as they shouted coordinates and orders. She pressed herself against the wall as 3 men in black suits rushed past her, their weapons drawn, their faces set with the cold efficiency of soldiers entering battle. But they weren't running toward the fire. They were running toward the vault. Clara's stomach twisted. She knew the protocol. She'd overheard enough late-night conversations to understand how things worked in Vincent Moretti's world. When crisis struck, priorities were clear. Secure the boss, secure the assets, secure the exits. Everything else was expendable. The smoke was thickening now, rolling through the corridors like a living thing. Clara covered her mouth with her sleeve and moved toward the main staircase. Through the ornate banister, she could see the first floor descending into pandemonium. Men shouted into radios. Someone was trying to carry out a massive oil painting. The front doors stood open, and through them, Clara could see the first orange glow of flames reflecting off the cars in the circular driveway. That's when she heard it. A child's scream, high and terrified, cutting through all the other noise like a knife. Clara's blood went cold. "Sophia," she breathed. Sophia Moretti, 8 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her late mother's gentle smile. The little girl who spoke to Clara in the kitchen when no one else was watching, who drew pictures of flowers and left them on Clara's pillow in the servants' quarters. The child who existed in a world of armed guards and hushed conversations but still believed in fairy tales. Another scream, weaker this time, coming from the second floor. Clara looked toward the main staircase. Smoke was already pouring down from above, thick and black, the heat creating a shimmering distortion in the air. She could hear the fire now, a low, hungry roar that promised destruction. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to follow the guards out the front door and into the safety of the night. Instead, she ran toward the stairs. The heat hit her like a physical blow as she reached the second-floor landing. The hallway was a tunnel of smoke, and Clara dropped to her knees, remembering something she'd read once about smoke rising and clearer air staying low. She crawled forward, her eyes streaming, her lungs burning with each breath. The carpet beneath her hands was hot, almost too hot to touch. "Sophia!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Sophia, where are you?" No answer. Just the relentless roar of the fire and the sound of wood beginning to crack under the intense heat. Clara knew the layout of the mansion as well as anyone, better than most of the security team who rotated in and out. Sophia's room was at the end of the east wing, the farthest point from the main staircase. Of course it was. Clara pushed forward, counting doors even though she could barely see them through the smoke. The wallpaper was starting to bubble and peel, and somewhere behind her she heard the crash of something heavy collapsing. When she reached Sophia's door, it was hot to the touch. Clara wrapped her hand in the fabric of her uniform and turned the handle, throwing her shoulder against the wood when it stuck. The door burst open, and she tumbled into a room that looked like a scene from hell. The curtains were completely engulfed in flames, the fire climbing toward the ceiling with terrifying speed. Sophia's white canopy bed was untouched, but the smoke was so thick that Clara couldn't see more than a few feet in front of her face. She dropped back to the floor and crawled forward, sweeping her arms in wide arcs. "Sophia, baby, where are you?" Her hand hit something solid, a small shoe. Clara's heart leaped and she followed the shoe to a small body curled beneath the bed. Sophia was unconscious, her face pale, her lips tinged with blue. Clara grabbed the child and pulled her out, cradling her against her chest. The little girl was so light, so fragile. Clara could feel the rapid flutter of her heartbeat. Still alive, thank God, still alive. But her breathing was shallow and labored. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Clara stood, keeping Sophia pressed close, and ran for the door. The heat was unbearable now, and she could feel her skin beginning to burn through her clothes. The hallway had transformed in the minutes she'd been in Sophia's room. What had been smoke-filled was now a corridor of actual flames, the fire having found fuel in the expensive antiques and oil paintings that lined the walls. Clara ran anyway. She couldn't see. She couldn't breathe. She moved on instinct and memory, her feet finding the path even as her eyes streamed and her lungs screamed for air. She felt the skin on her arms blistering, smelled the acrid scent of her own hair singing. Sophia remained limp in her arms, a precious burden that Clara would die before releasing. The staircase appeared through the smoke like a mirage. Clara took the steps two at a time, her vision narrowing to a tunnel, her entire world reduced to the child in her arms and the door at the bottom of the stairs. Behind her, she heard an ominous groan, the sound of a structure beginning to fail. She burst through the front doors just as the second-floor ceiling collapsed with a roar that shook the entire mansion. The cool night air hit her like a baptism. Clara staggered forward, her legs giving out, and she fell to her knees on the gravel driveway, still clutching Sophia. Someone was shouting. Hands grabbed at her, trying to take the child. Clara held on, her fingers locked, until she heard a voice that made her finally let go. "Give her to me. Now." Vincent Moretti. Clara looked up through streaming eyes and saw him, the man who ruled an empire built on fear and violence, whose very name made grown men flinch. He stood over her in his perfectly tailored suit, not a hair out of place despite the inferno raging behind them. But his face was wrong. There was something in his expression that Clara had never seen before, something raw and almost human. She released Sophia, and Vincent scooped his daughter into his arms with a tenderness that seemed impossible for hands that had ordered so much death. He pressed his face against her hair, and for just a moment, the mask slipped completely. "She's breathing," Clara managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "She's alive." Vincent looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something flicker in those cold, dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the dawning realization that the woman who cleaned his floors had just done what an entire security team had failed to do. "Get the paramedics," he roared, his voice cracking with an emotion Clara couldn't name. "Now." The world began to blur after that. Clara was vaguely aware of being lifted, of someone wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She heard sirens in the distance, saw the red and blue lights painting the nightmare scene in strobe-like flashes. The mansion continued to burn behind them, 3 stories of history and secrets being consumed by flames that seemed to reach for the stars. But all Clara could see was Sophia's small chest rising and falling as the paramedics worked over her with practiced efficiency. Alive. She was alive. And as consciousness finally began to slip away, Clara heard Vincent Moretti's voice one more time, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "Find out who did this, and when you do." A pause, heavy with promise. "Bring them to me." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and something else, something darker that Clara couldn't quite identify. Pain perhaps, or fear. She opened her eyes slowly, fighting against the heaviness of medication and exhaustion, and found herself staring at a white ceiling marred by a single water stain in the shape of a continent she couldn't name. Her body felt like it had been dipped in acid. Every inch of skin screamed with a deep throbbing pain that made even breathing an act of courage. Clara tried to move her hand and gasped as the burned flesh stretched and pulled. Bandages covered both her arms from wrist to shoulder, and she could feel more wrappings across her back and neck. "Don't move." The voice was soft but firm. A nurse appeared in her field of vision, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and efficient hands. "You've got second-degree burns over 30% of your body, honey. The more still you stay, the better." Clara's throat felt like sandpaper. "Sophia," she croaked. "The little girl. Is she—" "The Moretti child is fine," the nurse said, adjusting Clara's IV with practiced ease. "Thanks to you, from what I hear. You're quite the hero." Hero. The word felt foreign and uncomfortable. Clara wasn't a hero. She was just someone who had heard a child crying and couldn't walk away. That wasn't heroism. That was just being human. But as the nurse left and Clara stared at that water-stained ceiling, she began to understand that in Vincent Moretti's world, being human was perhaps the rarest quality of all. The door opened 3 hours later. Clara had been drifting in and out of consciousness, her dreams filled with smoke and flames and the sound of Sophia's screams. She assumed it was another nurse coming to check her vitals or adjust her medication. Instead, she heard the click of expensive leather shoes on linoleum and the subtle rustle of a suit that probably cost more than she made in a year. Vincent Moretti stood at the foot of her bed. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room. Older somehow. There were shadows under his eyes that Clara had never noticed before, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His tie was slightly loosened, and his 5 o'clock shadow had darkened into something more substantial. Behind him stood 2 men in black suits, their hands clasped in front of them, their eyes scanning the room with the perpetual vigilance of professional bodyguards. But Vincent dismissed them with a slight gesture, and they stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, Vincent just looked at her. Clara felt exposed under that gaze, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. She'd spent 6 years making herself invisible to this man, and now she was the only thing he could see. "How is she?" Clara asked, because someone had to break the silence and she genuinely needed to know. "Alive." Vincent's voice was rough, as if he'd been shouting or crying or perhaps both. "Smoke inhalation. Minor burns on her hands. They're keeping her overnight for observation, but the doctors say she'll make a full recovery." He paused, and something flickered across his face. "Because of you." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Vincent moved closer, and Clara noticed he was carrying something. A briefcase, sleek and black. He set it on the chair beside her bed and opened it with a quiet click. Inside, stacked in neat bundles, was more cash than Clara had ever seen in her life. $500,000, Vincent said flatly, as if he were discussing the weather. "Tax-free, plus a letter of recommendation that will open any door you want opened. You'll never have to work again if you don't want to." Clara stared at the money. It was real. She could see the authentic texture of the bills, the way they were bound with paper bands stamped with a bank's logo. $500,000. Enough to change her life completely. Enough to finally escape the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck survival that had defined her entire adult existence. She looked back at Vincent. No. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "No, I don't want your money." Clara's voice was stronger now, fueled by something she couldn't quite name. "I didn't save Sophia for a reward. I saved her because she's a child and she was in danger, that's all." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Everyone wants something, Miss Dawson. Name your price." "There is no price." Clara met his gaze steadily. Despite the pain and the drugs and the fact that she was talking to one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Moretti. I did what any decent person would do." For the first time in 6 years of working in his house, Clara saw Vincent Moretti truly caught off guard. He stood there, this man who controlled politicians and judges, who had built an empire on knowing exactly how to leverage what people wanted, and he had no response. "You don't understand," he said finally, and there was something almost desperate in his tone. "I owe you a debt. In my world, debts must be paid." "Then consider it paid," Clara said. "Your daughter is alive. That's payment enough." Vincent closed the briefcase with a sharp snap. He turned away from her, walking to the window that looked out over the hospital parking lot. The early morning light was just beginning to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Clara too much of flames. "They're dead," Vincent said suddenly. "The men who were supposed to protect my home, my daughter. All of them. I let them go last night." Clara's breath caught. When he said, "let them go," she knew he didn't mean fired. In Vincent Moretti's world, failure had permanent consequences. "The fire wasn't an accident," he continued, still staring out the window. "Someone torched my house deliberately. Someone who knew the security protocols, who knew exactly where the weak points were." He turned back to face her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "Someone wanted to send me a message." "What kind of message?" "That they can reach me. That they can touch what's mine." His hands clenched into fists. "That they can hurt my daughter." Clara understood then. This wasn't over. Whatever had started with that fire was still burning, and Sophia was still in danger. And by extension, so was she. "There are cameras everywhere in this hospital," Vincent said, as if reading her thoughts. My men are stationed at every entrance. No one gets in or out without my knowledge. You're safe here. For how long? The question hung in the air between them. Vincent didn't answer, which was answer enough. A soft knock interrupted the tension. The door opened slightly, and one of Vincent's guards spoke in rapid Italian. Clara didn't understand the words, but she understood the urgency in his tone. Vincent's expression hardened. "I have to go," he said, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at her. "The offer stands, Miss Dawson. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. You saved my daughter's life. That means you're under my protection now, whether you accept the money or not." "I didn't do it for you," Clara said, echoing the words from that night. "I did it for her." Something passed across Vincent's face. Respect, perhaps. Or maybe just confusion at encountering someone who didn't want something from him. "That's what makes you different from everyone else in my world," he said quietly. "And that's exactly why you're in danger now." He left before Clara could ask what he meant. The rest of the day passed in a blur of doctor visits and medication changes. Clara learned that she would need skin grafts for some of the deeper burns, that she would be in the hospital for at least 2 weeks, that the scars would be permanent. The doctor spoke in gentle tones about reconstructive surgery and physical therapy, about pain management and psychological counseling, but Clara barely heard them. Her mind kept replaying Vincent's words. "You're in danger now." That evening, as twilight darkened her window, Clara's door opened again. This time it wasn't Vincent. It was Sophia. The little girl stood in the doorway wearing pink pajamas covered in cartoon bears, her dark hair pulled into 2 pigtails. Her hands were wrapped in white bandages and there was a small oxygen cannula in her nose, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Clara?" she whispered, and her voice was the sweetest sound Clara had heard in days. "Hey, sweetheart." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You shouldn't be out of bed. I told them I needed to see you." Sophia moved into the room and Clara saw one of Vincent's guards standing discreetly in the hallway. "I had to say thank you." The little girl climbed carefully onto the edge of Clara's bed, mindful of her injuries. Up close, Clara could see the faint smell of smoke that still clung to her hair, could see the shadow of trauma in eyes too young to carry such weight. "You saved my life," Sophia said solemnly. "Daddy told me. He said you ran into the fire when everyone else ran away." Clara reached out with her bandaged hand and gently touched Sophia's cheek. "I couldn't leave you there, baby. I just couldn't." Sophia leaned into the touch and Clara saw tears forming in her eyes. "My mama died when I was 4, she whispered. "I don't remember her much, but Daddy says she was brave like you." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She knew vaguely that Vincent had been a widower for years, but she'd never heard the story. In the Moretti household, the past was a locked room that no one entered. "I'm sure she was braver than me," Clara said gently. "Daddy's different now," Sophia continued, and there was something knowing in her voice, something too adult for an 8-year-old. "Since the fire, he looks at me different. He looks at you different." She paused, considering. "I think you scared him." "I scared him?" Sophia nodded seriously. "You made him feel something he didn't want to feel. That's scary for people like my daddy." Before Clara could respond, Vincent himself appeared in the doorway. His face softened when he saw his daughter, a transformation so complete that Clara almost didn't recognize him. "Time for bed, Piccola," he said gently. Sophia hugged Clara carefully, mindful of the burns, and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for being brave enough to feel." As Vincent led his daughter away, Clara was left alone with the weight of those words, and a growing certainty that her life had changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The fire had destroyed the Moretti mansion, but it had ignited something far more dangerous. It had made Vincent Moretti realize he was still capable of feeling human, and in his world, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Clara was discharged from the hospital on a gray Thursday morning, exactly 16 days after the fire. The doctors had wanted to keep her longer, but she'd insisted. The sterile walls and constant monitoring were suffocating her, and the knowledge that Vincent Moretti's men stood guard outside her door 24 hours a day made her feel more like a prisoner than a patient. A black Mercedes was waiting at the hospital's side entrance, away from the main doors where reporters had been camping out since the story broke. Clara had seen the headlines on the nurses' phones when they thought she wasn't looking. "Housekeeper risks life to save mob boss's daughter." "Mystery woman behind Moretti fire rescue." Who is Clara Dawson? The question haunted her. Who was she? A week ago, she'd known the answer. Now, with her arms wrapped in fresh bandages and her belongings stuffed into a hospital-issued plastic bag, she felt like a stranger to herself. The driver was a man named Marcus, one of Vincent's regular security detail. He was professional and silent, holding the door open for her without making eye contact. Clara slid into the back seat, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing skin, and found that she wasn't alone. Vincent sat in the far corner, his attention focused on a tablet in his hands. He wore a charcoal suit and a burgundy tie, every inch the businessman except for the 9mm pistol Clara could see in the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. "Miss Dawson," he said without looking up, "I trust you're feeling better. Well enough to leave." Clara adjusted herself carefully, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate her burns. "Where are we going?" "That depends on you." Vincent finally looked at her, and Clara was struck again by how different he seemed. There was a weariness to him now, a crack in the armor that hadn't been there before. "Your apartment in Queens is no longer safe. We found surveillance equipment in your bedroom. Cameras, listening devices. Someone's been watching you for at least 3 months." Clara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Whoever set the fire wanted information on my household routines. You were the easiest target." Vincent's voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara could see the tension in his jaw. "They knew your schedule, knew you lived alone, knew you had access to parts of the house my security team never entered." The implication hung heavy in the air. They'd used her. Some unknown enemy had turned Clara into an unwitting spy in Vincent Moretti's home, and now she was caught in a web she didn't understand. "So what now?" Clara asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You keep me locked up somewhere until you find whoever did this." "I'm offering you protection," Vincent corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Clara met his gaze. "Because from where I'm sitting, protection looks a lot like captivity." A ghost of a smile touched Vincent's lips. "You're not wrong." He closed the tablet and set it aside. "I've purchased a property in Westchester County. Gated community, excellent security, completely isolated. You'll have your own space, your own staff if you want it. Sophia asked if you could stay close to us." Clara's heart twisted at the mention of Sophia. The little girl had visited her 3 more times during her hospital stay, always with a drawing or a book to read aloud, always treating Clara like she was something precious. It was hard not to love her. "And if I say no?" Clara asked. Vincent's expression darkened. "Then I'll assign a protection detail to follow you wherever you go. They'll be outside your apartment, your workplace, everywhere you shop or eat or sleep. You'll never have privacy again." He leaned forward slightly. "Or you can accept my offer. Live in a place where you're safe, where Sophia can visit you without putting herself at risk, where you can heal without looking over your shoulder every second." It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Clara closed her eyes and thought about her cramped studio apartment with its broken radiator and cockroaches that appeared no matter how much she cleaned. She thought about taking the subway to and from work, always aware of the men in dark suits trailing 3 cars behind. She thought about Sophia's face lighting up when Clara walked into her room. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Until we find who's responsible. Could be weeks, could be months." Vincent's voice softened imperceptibly. "I know I'm asking a lot, Miss Dawson, but you're caught in this now whether either of us likes it. The moment you ran into that fire, you became part of my world." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. Beneath the expensive suit and the cold exterior, she saw something unexpected. Guilt. Vincent Moretti felt guilty that she was in danger because of him. "Okay," she said, "but I have conditions." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? I'm not a prisoner. If I want to leave the property, I leave. If I want visitors, I have visitors. And I want to work. I'm not going to sit around doing nothing while you pay for everything. That's not necessary." "It is to me," Clara interrupted. "I need to do something, Mr. Moretti. I need to feel like myself." Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Clara couldn't read what was happening behind those dark eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed. With the understanding that any trips off the property are coordinated with security. I won't risk your life for the sake of your independence." It was as close to compromise as she was going to get. Clara nodded. The house in Westchester was nothing like the mansion that had burned. It was smaller, more modern, with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over carefully manicured gardens. Marcus pulled through iron gates that closed silently behind them, and Clara counted at least 6 security cameras on the approach alone. Inside, the house was furnished but impersonal, like a very expensive hotel. Hardwood floors, neutral colors, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than Clara's car. Vincent led her through the main living area to a wing on the eastern side of the house. "This will be yours," he said. opening a door to reveal a spacious suite with a sitting area, bedroom, and private bathroom. Sophia and I are in the opposite wing. My office is downstairs if you need anything. Clara stepped inside and felt overwhelmed by the sheer luxury of it. The bed was enormous, covered in what looked like silk sheets. The bathroom had a soaking tub and a shower with multiple heads. There was even a small balcony overlooking the gardens. "This is too much," she said. "It's what you deserve." Vincent's voice was firm. "You saved my daughter, Miss Dawson. This is the least I can do." Before Clara could respond, she heard a squeal of delight and the sound of running feet. Sophia burst into the room, her bandaged hands already reaching for Clara. "You're here. You're really here." The little girl wrapped her arms around Clara's waist, careful of her injuries. "Daddy said you were coming to stay with us." Clara looked at Vincent over Sophia's head and saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten. He was watching them with an intensity that bordered on painful, as if he was trying to memorize this moment, this simple scene of his daughter hugging someone with pure joy. "Yeah, sweetheart," Clara said, running her hand over Sophia's dark hair. "I'm here." The first week passed in a strange sort of limbo. Clara spent her days healing, her wounds slowly closing under the care of a private nurse who visited daily. Sophia was her constant companion, bringing her books and puzzles, chattering about school and her favorite TV shows. The little girl seemed lighter somehow, as if the fire had burned away some invisible weight she'd been carrying. Vincent was a ghost in his own house. Clara would catch glimpses of him, heading to his office before dawn, returning late at night smelling of cigar smoke and danger. He was hunting, she realized, tracking down whoever had dared to attack his family. And based on the tension that radiated from his security team, he wasn't having much success. It was on the 8th night that Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, listening. The house was supposed to be secure, cameras everywhere, guards at every entrance, but that sound had been real, coming from somewhere downstairs. Clara grabbed the robe hanging on her door and stepped into the hallway. Emergency lights illuminated the corridor in dim red, and she could hear voices shouting in Italian from below. She moved toward the stairs, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The main living room was chaos. 3 of Vincent's men were wrestling with someone on the floor, a man in dark clothes with blood streaming from his nose. Vincent stood over them, his gun drawn, his face a mask of cold fury that made Clara's blood freeze. "Where is he?" Vincent demanded, his voice like ice. "Where's Carmine?" The man on the floor spat blood and said something in rapid Italian that Clara couldn't follow. Vincent's expression didn't change, but he moved with sudden violence, pressing the barrel of his gun against the man's kneecap. "I'll ask one more time." Clara must have made a sound because Vincent's head snapped toward the stairs. His eyes widened when he saw her standing there in her nightgown and robe, looking down at a scene that could have come from a nightmare. "Get her out of here," he barked at Marcus. But Clara was already backing away, her hand pressed to her mouth. She made it to her room before the nausea hit. Clara barely reached the bathroom in time, her stomach rebelling against the violence she'd witnessed. She sat on the cold tile floor, trembling, and finally understood what Vincent had meant when he said she was part of his world now. This wasn't just protection, this was war. A soft knock came at her door half an hour later. Clara had cleaned herself up and was sitting on her bed, still shaking. She opened the door to find Vincent standing there, his gun nowhere in sight, his hands shoved into his pockets like a man who didn't know what to do with them. "I'm sorry you saw that," he said. "Who was he?" "Someone who made a mistake." Vincent's jaw tightened. "He won't make another one." Clara felt sick again. "Did you kill him?" "Not yet." Vincent met her eyes, and there was no apology in his gaze. "This is who I am, Miss Dawson. This is the world you're living in now. If you want to leave—" "I can't leave," Clara interrupted, and the truth of it hit her like a wave. "You made sure of that when you told me someone's been watching me, when you showed me that I'm a target." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm trapped here, Mr. Moretti. Trapped in your world whether I want to be or not." Vincent flinched as if she'd struck him. For a long moment he just stood there, and Clara saw the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders. He'd saved her by pulling her into his orbit, but in doing so, he'd destroyed any chance she had of returning to her old life. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and the words sounded foreign coming from his mouth. "I never meant to—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "You were just supposed to be safe. That's all I wanted." Clara looked at this man who commanded so much fear, who held life and death in his hands like playing cards, and saw something she'd never expected to see. He was broken. The fire hadn't just destroyed his house, It had shattered something fundamental inside him, and he didn't know how to put the pieces back together. "Your daughter is alive because of me," Clara said quietly, "but I'm not sure if that means I saved her or damned us both." Vincent had no answer for that. He turned and walked away, leaving Clara alone with the knowledge that the fire had changed everything. And like Sophia had said, the scariest part wasn't the flames. It was what they'd revealed in the burning. The autumn rain came 3 weeks after Clara moved into the Westchester house, turning the manicured gardens into a watercolor painting of grays and browns. She stood at her bedroom window watching the droplets race down the glass, feeling like she was looking at the world through a barrier she could never cross. The routine had become familiar. Wake up, physical therapy with the nurse, lunch with Sophia, who was being homeschooled now, too dangerous to send her back to her private academy, afternoons of reading or watching the little girl draw elaborate pictures of castles and dragons, evenings alone while Vincent disappeared into his office or left the property entirely, always surrounded by armed men who moved like shadows. Clara had been in the Moretti orbit for nearly 2 months now, and she still felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She was bandaging her arms after the morning's wound care when she heard the shouting. Clara paused, listening. It was coming from Vincent's office downstairs, his voice raised in anger, something she'd only heard a handful of times. She shouldn't investigate. She should stay in her room and pretend she heard nothing, the way she'd learned to do during her years as a housekeeper. But Clara had stopped being just a housekeeper the night she ran into that fire. She made her way downstairs quietly, following the sound of voices to Vincent's office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see Vincent standing behind his massive oak desk, his hands braced on the surface, facing down 2 men in expensive suits. "You're making a mistake, Vincent." The speaker was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen too much and felt too little. "Stepping back now shows weakness. Carmine will interpret it as surrender." "I don't care what Carmine interprets it as," Vincent said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I'm consolidating my assets and transferring operational control to the council. That's final." The second man, younger with a scar running down his left cheek, shook his head. "You can't just walk away from this life, Capo. You know that. Once you're in forever. Watch me." Vincent straightened, and Clara saw something in his posture that she'd never seen before. Exhaustion. Deep, bone-tired exhaustion. "I've spent 20 years building this empire, and for what? So my daughter can grow up surrounded by armed guards? So she can wake up wondering if today's the day someone puts a bullet in her father's head? Your father, my father is dead," Vincent interrupted coldly. "He died in a prison cell because of this life. My wife died because some rival thought he could hurt me by killing her. I won't let Sophia become the next casualty." Clara's breath caught. She'd known Vincent's wife had died, but she hadn't known it was murder. The implications of that crashed over her like a wave. Sophia had lost her mother not to illness or accident, but to violence meant for her father. The older man leaned forward. "And what about the Dawson woman? You think hiding her here changes anything? Carmine already knows she's under your protection. He knows she means something to you." "She saved my daughter's life," Vincent said, but there was something in his voice, a defensiveness that made Clara's stomach twist. "That's all." "Is it?" The scarred man smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Word on the street is you've gone soft, Vincent. That a simple housekeeper made you remember what it's like to feel something. That's a dangerous reputation to have in our world." Vincent moved so fast that Clara almost missed it. One moment he was behind his desk, the next he had the scarred man by the throat, pinned against the bookshelf with such force that several leather-bound volumes tumbled to the floor. "Say that again," Vincent growled. "I dare you." The older man didn't move, didn't even look surprised. "Truth hurts, doesn't it? You've been different since the fire, Vincent. Distracted, human." He said the last word like it was a curse. "In this business, being human gets you killed." Vincent released the scarred man and stepped back, his chest heaving. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually lose control, might let the rage she could see simmering beneath his surface finally explode. Instead, he turned away, his hands curling into fists. "Get out," he said quietly. "Both of you. Tell the council my decision is final. I'm out." "You're signing your death warrant," the older man said, but he was already moving toward the door. And hers too. They left, and Clara barely had time to press herself against the wall before they swept past her, their faces grim. She waited until their footsteps faded before stepping into the doorway of Vincent's office. He stood with his back to her, staring out the window at the rain-soaked gardens. His shoulders were rigid, his entire body coiled like a spring under too much tension. "How much did you hear?" he asked without turning around. "Enough." Clara stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You're leaving the family business. Because of what happened. Because of what almost happened." Vincent finally turned to face her, and Clara saw the toll the last 2 months had taken on him. There were new lines around his eyes, new shadows beneath them. He looked like a man at war with himself. "I can't do this anymore, Miss Dawson. I can't look at my daughter and pretend that this life isn't going to destroy her the way it's destroyed everything else I've ever cared about." Clara moved closer, navigating carefully around the leather chairs positioned in front of his desk. "Your men said I'm the reason you've changed. That saving Sophia made you soft." Vincent laughed, but there was no humor in it. Soft, as if caring whether your child lives or dies is a weakness. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its usual perfect styling. "Do you know what I did yesterday, Miss Dawson? I tortured a man for information. Spent 3 hours breaking his fingers one by one until he told me what I needed to know. Then I put a bullet in his head and had his body dissolved in acid." He met her eyes. "That's who I am. That's what I do." Clara felt sick, but she didn't look away. "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand what you did when you saved Sophia." Vincent moved toward her, and Clara fought the instinct to step back. "You didn't just pull her out of a burning house. You pulled me out of something worse. A life where I'd convinced myself that violence and power were the only things that mattered. That love was just another weakness to exploit. I didn't do anything except—" "You risked your life for a child who meant nothing to you," Vincent interrupted. "No calculation, no angle, no expectation of reward. You just did it because it was right." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Clara could smell his cologne mixed with cigar smoke. "Do you have any idea how long it's been since I've met someone who does something just because it's right?" Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. "What do you want from me, Mr. Moretti?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I don't know if I want anything or if I'm just tired of taking. But I look at you and I see something I thought I'd lost 20 years ago." He paused. Hope. The word hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. Clara knew she should step back, should maintain the professional distance that had kept her safe all these years. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away from the raw vulnerability in Vincent Moretti's eyes. "Hope is a luxury people like you can't afford," Clara said quietly. "I know." Vincent's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But for the first time in my life, I want to try." A crash from upstairs shattered the moment. Both of them turned toward the door as running footsteps pounded down the hallway. Marcus burst into the office, his face pale, his gun drawn. "Sir, we have a situation. Someone breached the perimeter, east side by the gardens. We're tracking them now, but—" He didn't get to finish. The lights went out, plunging the office into darkness broken only by the gray light filtering through the windows. Emergency generators kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in the red glow of backup lighting. Vincent was moving before Clara could react, pulling his gun from the shoulder holster she'd learned was always there. "Where's Sophia?" "Playroom with Teresa," Marcus said, referring to one of the security team members. "But sir, there's something else." He hesitated. "We found this at the breach point." He handed Vincent something, a photograph. Even in the red emergency lighting, Clara could see what it showed. It was a picture of her and Sophia from earlier that week, sitting in the garden, the little girl's head on Clara's shoulder. Someone had been watching them. Someone had gotten close enough to take this picture despite all of Vincent's security measures. And scrawled across the bottom in red marker were 4 words that made Clara's blood run cold. "She burns next time." Vincent stared at the photograph, and Clara watched something break in him. The carefully maintained control, the cold calculation that had kept him alive in a world of monsters. It all shattered like glass under too much pressure. "Lock down the house," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Full protocol. No one in or out. And get Clara and Sophia into the safe room. Now." Marcus nodded and turned to Clara. "Ma'am, we need to move." The window exploded inward in a spray of glass and wood. Clara felt Vincent tackle her to the ground, his body covering hers as bullets tore through the office. She heard Marcus return fire, heard shouting from somewhere in the house, heard the high-pitched scream that could only be Sophia. Then everything became chaos. Vincent pulled Clara to her feet and pushed her toward the door, still shielding her with his body. They ran down the hallway as more windows shattered throughout the house. Clara could hear multiple shooters now, the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles mixing with the rapid fire of automatic weapons. They found Sophia in the playroom, pressed against the wall with Teresa covering her. The security woman was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but her gun was steady as she fired through the shattered window at targets Clara couldn't see. "Daddy," Sophia sobbed when she saw Vincent, and he scooped her up with one arm while keeping his gun raised with the other. "Safe room," he barked at Clara. "Third door on the left, code is 0818. Get inside and don't open it for anyone but me." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." Vincent's eyes met hers, and Clara saw the lie in them. He had no intention of following her into that safe room. He was going to stay and fight. "Vincent, go!" He practically shoved her toward the hallway. "Keep her safe, please." Clara grabbed Sophia from his arms, the little girl clinging to her like a lifeline. She ran down the hallway, hearing Teresa and Vincent laying down covering fire behind her. The third door was reinforced steel disguised as wood, and Clara's hands shook as she punched in the code. The door swung open to reveal a small room lined with monitors showing camera feeds from around the property. Clara pulled Sophia inside and slammed the door shut, engaging the deadbolts. The room was soundproofed, but she could still feel the vibrations of gunfire through the walls. On the monitors, Clara watched Vincent's war play out in real time. There were at least 6 attackers that she could see, professionals moving with military precision. Vincent's security team was outnumbered but fighting hard, turning the luxury home into a battlefield. And then she saw Vincent himself, moving through the carnage with deadly efficiency. Every shot he fired found its target. Every move was calculated for maximum damage. This was the man his enemies feared, the monster he'd been before a simple act of courage had reminded him what it meant to be human. Clara held Sophia close as the little girl cried into her shoulder, and she realized with stunning clarity what Vincent had tried to tell her. In his world, being human wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially fatal, and by making him remember his humanity, Clara had painted a target on all of them. The firefight lasted 17 minutes. When it finally ended, 4 of the attackers were dead, 2 had escaped, and 3 of Vincent's men were wounded. Vincent himself walked through the carnage untouched, his suit covered in blood that wasn't his face a mask of controlled fury. Clara opened the safe room door when she heard his voice calling for them. Sophia ran to her father, and Vincent caught her up in his arms, pressing his face into her hair with a desperation that made Clara's heart ache. Over his daughter's head, Vincent's eyes met Clara's, and in that moment, she saw the truth that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Everything had changed the night of the fire, but they were still burning, and this time they might not survive the flames. The Westchester house was abandoned within 48 hours of the attack. Too exposed, Vincent had said. Too many vulnerabilities. Clara watched from the back seat of an armored SUV as crews worked to erase any evidence that the Moretti family had ever lived there, and she wondered if this was how it always ended. Running, hiding, pretending the past could be erased as easily as fingerprints from a doorknob. Their new location was a penthouse in Manhattan, the top 3 floors of a building Vincent owned through a shell corporation buried under so many layers of legal protection that even the IRS couldn't trace it. The views were breathtaking. The entire city sprawled out beneath them like a kingdom made of light and steel. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were just in a prettier cage. Sophia had stopped talking. Not completely. She would still respond when directly asked a question, would still nod or shake her head. But the constant chatter, the innocent observations about the world that had once filled every moment had vanished. The little girl who had brought Clara drawings and read stories aloud now spent hours sitting at the window, staring out at the city with eyes that had seen too much. Clara found her there on the 5th morning, curled up in the window seat with her knees pulled to her chest. The early December sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but Sophia wasn't looking at the sunrise. She was looking at nothing, her gaze fixed on some internal landscape that Clara couldn't reach. "Hey, sweetheart," Clara said softly, sitting down beside her. "Want some breakfast? I could make those pancakes you like." Sophia shook her head slightly but didn't speak. Clara's heart ached. She'd spent enough time with traumatized children during her years working various jobs to recognize the signs. Sophia was withdrawing, building walls to protect herself from a world that had proven itself cruel and unpredictable. And there was nothing Clara could do except be present, be patient, and hope it would be enough. "Your dad loves you very much," Clara said quietly. "You know that, right? Everything he's doing to keep you safe. Is it working?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "Because it doesn't feel safe. It feels like we're always running. The observation was too mature, too aware. Clara wanted to offer reassurance, to promise that everything would be okay, but she'd learned not to lie to this child. Sophia deserved honesty, even when the truth was frightening. "Your dad is doing his best," Clara said instead. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." Sophia finally looked at her, and Clara saw tears gathering in those dark eyes. "I heard him last night, talking to Uncle Marco on the phone. He said he was transferring everything, all the businesses, all the territories. He said he was getting out." Her voice cracked. "Because of me. Because I'm making him weak." Clara felt something hot and fierce rise in her chest. She pulled Sophia into her arms, holding the little girl close. "You are not making him weak, baby. You're making him strong enough to choose a different life. Do you understand? Love isn't weakness. It's the hardest, bravest thing a person can do. Then why does everyone keep saying it's going to get us killed?" Clara had no answer for that. She just held Sophia and watched the sunrise paint the city in colors that reminded her too much of fire. Vincent was in his office when Clara finally went looking for him that afternoon. He sat behind another massive desk. Apparently that was a requirement for mob bosses, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and manila folders. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and Clara suspected he hadn't. "We need to talk," she said from the doorway. Vincent looked up, and for a moment she saw relief flash across his face before the mask slammed back into place. "Come in. Close the door." Clara did, moving into the office that smelled of leather and expensive scotch. She remained standing, her arms crossed. "Sophia thinks you're leaving your organization because of her, because she's making you weak." Vincent's expression darkened. She shouldn't have heard that, but she did, and now she's carrying guilt that an 8-year-old should never have to carry. Clara moved closer to his desk. "She needs to know the truth, Vincent. Not the sanitized version, the real truth, why you're doing this." "The real truth?" Vincent set down the pen he'd been holding and leaned back in his chair. "The real truth is that I've been a monster for 20 years, and it took my daughter almost dying for me to remember what it feels like to be human. Is that what you want me to tell her? I want you to tell her that you're choosing her, that she matters more than power or money or reputation." Clara's voice softened. "She needs to hear that from you." Vincent stood and moved to the window, staring out at the city the same way his daughter had that morning. "Do you know what my father told me when I was Sophia's age? He said that in our world, love is a liability, that the moment you care about something more than survival, you've already lost." He turned to face Clara. "I spent my whole life believing that, built an empire on that principle, and then you ran into a burning building for a child who wasn't yours, expecting nothing in return, and everything I believed shattered." Clara felt her breath catch. "Vincent, I'm leaving because of you, Miss Dawson." His voice was rough, honest in a way she'd never heard before. "Not just Sophia, you, because you showed me that there's still good in this world, and I want to be worthy of that. I want to be someone my daughter can be proud of." He paused. "Someone you don't have to be afraid of." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Clara didn't know what to say. This man who had built his life on violence and fear was dismantling everything because she'd shown him a moment of simple human decency. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. "I'm not brave," Clara said quietly. "I'm just someone who couldn't walk away when a child needed help." "That's exactly what makes you brave." Vincent moved closer, and Clara noticed for the first time that he'd removed his shoulder holster. No gun, no armor, just a man trying to figure out how to be something other than what he'd always been. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you staying because you want to, or because you're afraid of what will happen if you leave?" The question hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd been asking herself the same thing for weeks now, unable to find a clear answer. Was she here because she cared about Sophia? Because she'd developed some misguided sense of loyalty to Vincent? Or was she simply trapped, a bird in a gilded cage who'd forgotten what freedom looked like? "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I care about Sophia. She's an amazing kid who deserves better than this life. And you." She struggled for words. "You're trying to change, and that takes courage, but I also know that every day I stay here, I'm getting further from the person I used to be, from the life I had. Do you want that life back?" Clara thought about her cramped apartment, her rotating schedule of underpaid jobs, the way she'd moved through the world like a shadow no one noticed. "I don't know if I can go back," she said honestly. "I don't know if that person even exists anymore." Vincent nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer. "I'm meeting with the council tomorrow. Final transfer of authority. After that, I'm taking Sophia and disappearing for a while. 6 months, maybe a year. Somewhere far away where no one knows the Moretti name. He paused. I want you to come with us. Clara's heart stuttered. What? I know it's asking too much. I know you don't owe us anything and that you've already sacrificed more than anyone should have to. But Sophia, his voice cracked slightly. She needs you, Clara. And maybe, he stopped, seeming to struggle with something. Maybe I do too. The use of her first name felt intimate, dangerous. Clara had been Miss Dawson for so long that hearing her given name from Vincent's lips made something shift inside her chest. Where would we go? I have a place in New Zealand. Remote, secure, completely off the grid. No one from my old life knows about it. Vincent's eyes searched hers. We could start over, all three of us. Be normal people living normal lives. It was a fantasy, and they both knew it. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't just walk away and become normal. The world they inhabited didn't let you go that easily. But standing in that office, looking at a man who was genuinely trying to be better, Clara wanted to believe it was possible. I need time to think, she said. Vincent nodded. Of course, but Clara... He caught her hand as she turned to leave, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palm. Whatever you decide, you're free to go. No strings, no obligations. You've done more than enough. Clara looked down at their joined hands, hers scarred from the fire, his stained with 2 decades of violence, and wondered if two broken people could somehow make each other whole. The meeting with the council happened the next evening in a private room at a restaurant in Little Italy. Vincent had insisted Clara and Sophia stay in the penthouse with a full security detail, but Clara watched on a hidden camera feed that Vincent's second-in-command, Marco, had reluctantly agreed to provide. The room was filled with men who looked like they'd stepped out of a mob movie. Expensive suits, slicked back hair, the kind of faces that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. Vincent sat at the head of the table, a stack of legal documents in front of him, and Clara watched as he systematically dismantled the empire his father had built. Territory went to Salvatore Russo. Business interests were divided among 3 families. The offshore accounts were transferred to a trust that would distribute funds according to carefully negotiated terms. By the time Vincent finished signing documents, he'd effectively reduced himself from one of the most powerful crime bosses on the East Coast to a private citizen with a healthy bank account and no official ties to organized crime. The men around the table accepted it with varying degrees of approval and resentment. Some seemed genuinely respectful of Vincent's decision to step away. Others looked at him like he was committing suicide, and they were just waiting for the body to drop. It was Carmine Battaglia who finally spoke the thought they were all thinking. Carmine was older than Vincent by 15 years, with silver hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been Vincent's father's rival, and had spent the last 2 decades looking for an opportunity to take back what he felt he'd been owed. You're making a mistake, Vincent, Carmine said, his voice smooth as silk. You can sign all the papers you want, transfer all the assets, but you know as well as I do that you can't really leave. This life doesn't let you go. I'm not asking for permission, Vincent replied evenly. I'm informing you of my decision. And the woman? Carmine's smile widened. The housekeeper who's got you believing in redemption and second chances? What happens when someone decides she's a liability? When someone decides that the best way to hurt you is to hurt her? The temperature in the room dropped. Vincent's expression didn't change, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists beneath the table. If anyone touches Clara Dawson or my daughter, Vincent said quietly, there won't be enough pieces left of them to fill a coffee can. Counsel or no counsel, retirement or no retirement. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Carmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's the Vincent Moretti I remember. Still a monster under all that newfound conscience. He leaned forward. You can run to New Zealand or Timbuktu or the moon for all I care, but you'll always be one of us. And one day, that life you're trying to leave behind will come knocking, and when it does, you'll remember who you really are. Vincent stood, gathering his documents. Meeting's adjourned, gentlemen. It's been an education working with you all. He walked out without another word, and Clara watched on the monitor as the room erupted into conversation. She could see Carmine's face, see the calculation in his eyes, and she knew with absolute certainty that Vincent's warning hadn't been enough. Carmine Battaglia was going to be a problem. Vincent returned to the penthouse 2 hours later to find Clara waiting for him in the living room. Sophia was asleep upstairs, finally exhausted enough to rest after days of fitful insomnia. The city lights created patterns on the walls, and the space felt surreal. like they were suspended between two worlds, not quite belonging to either. "How did it go?" Clara asked, though she'd seen most of it herself. "It's done." Vincent poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and drank half of it in one swallow. "As of tomorrow morning, I'm officially retired." He laughed bitterly. "Whatever that means in this world. Carmine's going to come after us." Vincent looked at her sharply. "You were watching." Marco set it up. "He thought I should know what we're dealing with." Clara stood and moved closer to Vincent. "He's right, isn't he? You can't really leave." "I can try." Vincent set down his glass and turned to face her fully. "I know the odds are against us. I know that men like Carmine don't forgive and they don't forget. But I have to try, Clara. For Sophia. For—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "For the chance to be something other than what I've been." Clara looked at this man who had terrified her, protected her, and somehow made her believe that people could change. She thought about Sophia sleeping upstairs, about the scars on her own arms that would never fully fade, about the choice that stood before her like a crossroads. She could leave. Vincent had given her that option, had promised no consequences. She could return to her old life or build a new one entirely, free from the violence and danger that followed the Moretti name. Or she could stay, could believe in the fantasy of New Zealand and fresh starts, could be part of whatever Vincent and Sophia became in their new life. "I'll come with you," Clara said quietly, "to New Zealand, but on one condition." Vincent's expression shifted, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "Name it. You have to promise me that you're really done, that the first time things get difficult, the first time someone threatens us, you don't turn back into the man you were, because Sophia can't survive that, Vincent. She can't watch her father become a monster again. And you?" Vincent asked softly. "Can you survive it?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I don't know, but I'm willing to find out if you are." Vincent closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He reached out slowly, giving Clara time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were something precious that might break. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you're showing me," he whispered. "I swear it." Then he kissed her, and Clara felt the last of her walls crumble. It was soft and desperate and tasted like scotch and promises that might be impossible to keep. But in that moment, suspended between one life and another, Clara let herself believe. They left for New Zealand 3 days later, disappearing in the middle of the night with nothing but packed bags and new identities. Vincent Moretti became Vincent Morrison, mild-mannered investor. Sophia became Sophie, and Clara became Claire Morrison, Vincent's wife on paper, though the ring on her finger felt strange and weighted with implications neither of them had fully explored. As their plane lifted off from JFK, Clara looked out the window at the city disappearing beneath them and wondered if they were flying toward salvation or simply running from a reckoning that would eventually find them anyway. But beside her, Sophie, was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, her small hand clutched in Clara's. And across the aisle, Vincent watched them both with an expression that looked almost like peace. Maybe that was enough. Maybe hope was always a gamble, and love always a risk worth taking. Or maybe Carmine had been right, and the past was a chain that could never truly be broken. Only time would tell which truth would win. New Zealand was beautiful in a way that made Clara's chest ache. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly under impossibly blue skies, and the air smelled clean, untainted by exhaust fumes or the acrid smoke of burning buildings. Their home was a renovated farmhouse on the South Island, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by sheep pastures and the kind of silence that city dwellers forgot existed. For 6 months, they lived like the family they pretended to be. Vincent Morrison now, though Clara still sometimes caught herself about to say his real name, had transformed in ways that seemed almost miraculous. He woke early to make breakfast, drove Sophie to her small rural school, spent afternoons reading on the porch or fixing things around the property. The gun he'd carried constantly in New York stayed locked in a safe that he rarely opened. The phone calls to Marco and the handful of trusted associates who knew where they were became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Clara watched him become someone new, or perhaps become someone he'd been before the violence had carved away everything soft. He laughed more. The permanent tension in his shoulders gradually eased. When he looked at Sophie, at his daughter who was finally just a little girl again, not a target or a liability, there was nothing but pure, uncomplicated love. And when he looked at Clara, there was something else. something that had been building since the night he'd kissed her in the Manhattan penthouse, something neither of them had dared to name, but that filled the spaces between them like electricity. They'd been careful at first, separate bedrooms, professional distance, the polite fiction that Clara was just there to help with Sophie's transition, but proximity and pretense could only last so long. There were moments, hands brushing while doing dishes, meaningful glances across the dinner table, the way Vincent's voice softened when he said her name, that made it clear the line between performance and reality had blurred beyond recognition. It was on a cool autumn evening in April, autumn in New Zealand, though Clara's body still expected spring, that everything changed. Sophie was at a sleepover with a girl from her class, a normal childhood experience that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Clara and Vincent were alone in the farmhouse for the first time since they'd arrived, and the silence felt different, charged with possibility and the weight of unspoken feelings. They'd made dinner together, moving around each other in the kitchen with practiced ease. Vincent had opened a bottle of local wine, and they'd eaten on the back porch watching the sun paint the hills in shades of gold and amber. When the dishes were done and the night had settled around them, they found themselves sitting on the couch in the living room, closer than necessary, neither quite willing to break the spell by acknowledging what was happening. "I never thought I could have this," Vincent said quietly, staring into the fireplace where logs crackled and popped. Peace, normalcy, a life where the biggest decision is what to make for dinner. Clara shifted to look at him. In the firelight, he looked younger somehow. The harsh edges softened, the coldness in his eyes replaced by something warmer. "Do you miss it? Your old life?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes I miss the certainty, knowing my place in the world, knowing the rules even if they were brutal. But then I wake up and hear Sophie laughing in the kitchen, or I watch you reading in the garden, and I realize," he turned to face her fully, "I'd burn that entire world to the ground if it meant keeping this one." Clara's heart was pounding. "Vincent, I love you." The words came out rushed as if he'd been holding them back for so long that they'd finally burst free. "I know I have no right to feel that way. I know you came here for Sophie, not for me, but I can't pretend anymore, Clara. I can't keep acting like you're just the woman who saved my daughter. You saved me too." Clara couldn't breathe. She'd known on some level that this was coming, had felt the shift between them, the way caring for Sophie had evolved into caring for each other. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I love you too," she whispered, and saw relief flood Vincent's face. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But somewhere between New York and here, between watching you learn to be a father and seeing you fight to be a better man," she touched his face gently, "you became someone I couldn't help but love." Vincent kissed her then, and it was nothing like that first desperate kiss in Manhattan. This was slow and deep and full of promise. The kiss of two people who had found each other in the ruins of their old lives and decided to build something new. Clara let herself sink into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have this happiness. They made love that night in front of the fireplace, tender and almost reverent, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear if they weren't careful. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt more at peace than she had in years. "Marry me," Vincent said into the darkness. "For real this time. Not just papers and a cover story. Marry me because you want to, because you choose this life with me." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Are you sure? Once we do that, there's no going back. No more pretending this is temporary." "I don't want to go back." Vincent's voice was fierce, certain. "I want to move forward. With you, with Sophie. I want to build a life where the past doesn't define us." Clara kissed him softly. "Then yes, I'll marry you." They set the date for 2 months later, a small ceremony in the garden, just the three of them, and a local minister who knew them only as the quiet American family who kept to themselves. Sophie was delighted, planning decorations and insisting on being the flower girl. For those 2 months, their little world felt perfect. Clara should have known perfection never lasted. The warning came from Marco on a Tuesday morning in late May. Vincent's old second-in-command hadn't called in 4 months, and the sound of his voice on the phone immediately set off alarm bells in Clara's head. She watched Vincent's face change as he listened, watched the careful peace they'd built begin to crack. "How long?" Vincent asked tersely. There was a pause. "And you're sure it's him?" Another pause, longer this time. "No, don't do anything. I'll handle it." He hung up and stood motionless for a long moment. his back to Clara. "What is it?" Clara asked, though part of her already knew. "Carmine." Vincent's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of the man he used to be. "He's been tracking us. Marco's sources say he left New York 3 days ago, heading this direction." Clara's stomach dropped. "How did he find us? Does it matter?" Vincent turned, and Clara saw the war happening behind his eyes. "He's coming, Clara. And when he gets here, he won't just want to send a message, he'll want blood. So what do we do?" Clara forced herself to stay calm, to think. "We run again? Find somewhere else?" "There is nowhere else." Vincent moved to the window, staring out at the peaceful landscape that suddenly felt like a trap. "Men like Carmine don't give up. We can run to the ends of the earth and he'll follow. Because this isn't about territory or money anymore. It's about pride, about proving that no one walks away from that life." Clara joined him at the window, taking his hand. "Then we fight." Vincent looked at her sharply. "No, absolutely not. I left that world so you and Sophie wouldn't have to live with violence. I'm not dragging you into it now." "We're already in it," Clara said firmly. "The moment I pulled Sophie out of that fire, the moment you decided to leave, we were in it. So stop trying to protect me from reality and tell me what we're going to do." Vincent studied her face, and Clara saw the exact moment he made his decision. The moment he stopped trying to be only Vincent Morrison and accepted that Vincent Moretti would always be part of who he was. "We prepare," he said quietly, "and we pray it's enough." The next 3 days were a crash course in survival. Vincent pulled weapons from hiding places Clara hadn't known existed. Guns in false bottoms of drawers, ammunition buried in the garden shed, body armor stored in vacuum-sealed bags under the floorboards. He taught Clara how to shoot, how to move tactically through the house, how to recognize signs of surveillance. Sophie knew something was wrong. Clara could see it in the way the little girl watched her father with 2 knowing eyes, the way she stayed close to Clara at all times. On the second night, Sophie came to Clara's room, their room now, since Vincent had moved his things in, and climbed into bed between them. "The bad men are coming, aren't they?" Sophie whispered. "The ones from before." Vincent pulled his daughter close. "I won't let them hurt you, Piccola, I promise." "I know you won't." Sophie looked at Clara. "But what about Claire? What if they hurt her?" Clara's heart broke. This child had already lost her mother to violence, had already been through one fire that nearly killed her, and now she was facing it all again because adults couldn't let go of their wars. "Your dad and I are going to keep each other safe," Clara said, hoping it wasn't a lie. "And we're all going to keep you safe. That's what families do." "Real families or pretend families?" Sophie asked with the devastating perception of children. Clara and Vincent looked at each other over their daughter's head. "Real families," Vincent said firmly. "The realest family I've ever had." Carmine arrived on the 4th day, just before dawn. Vincent's security system, basic by his New York standards but sophisticated for rural New Zealand, alerted them to the breach. 2 vehicles, 6 men, approaching from the main road with their lights off. Clara's hands shook as she helped Sophie into the body armor Vincent had modified to fit her small frame, as she led her to the reinforced panic room they'd prepared in the basement. "I want to stay with you," Sophie protested, tears streaming down her face. "You can't, baby." Clara kissed her forehead. "But we're going to be right upstairs, and as soon as it's safe, we're coming to get you. I promise." "You promised last time too," Sophie sobbed. "And then everything burned." Clara had no answer for that. She just held the little girl until Vincent gently pulled them apart, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Stay with her until the last possible moment," he told Clara. "If they breach the basement, there's a tunnel that leads to the barn. Take Sophie and run. Marco has people positioned 3 miles east. Follow the coordinates I showed you and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Clara said. "You will if I tell you to." Vincent's voice was hard, the voice of a man who'd commanded soldiers and killers. "She's the priority, always. Promise me." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist they could all make it out together. But she saw the truth in Vincent's eyes. He was preparing to make a last stand, to buy them time with his life if necessary. "I promise," she whispered. "But Vincent," she grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "You come back to us. You promised Sophie a real family and you promised to marry me. Don't you dare break those promises." Vincent kissed her hard and desperate. "Ti amo," he whispered, the first time he'd ever used Italian with her. "Remember that, no matter what happens." Then he was gone, moving upstairs with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 20 years preparing for war. Clara held Sophie in the panic room, listening to the sounds of men approaching the house, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. The first shots came at 5:47 a.m. Clara knew the time because she was staring at her watch, counting seconds, trying to keep Sophie calm while her own heart threatened to beat out of her chest. The gunfire was distant at first, Vincent engaging them outside, trying to keep the battle away from the house. But it grew closer, louder, until Clara could hear individual shots and the sharp reports of different weapons. Then there was an explosion that shook the entire structure. Sophie screamed, and Clara pulled her close, her own mind racing. Fire. They were using fire again. Carmine knew it had worked before, knew it would force them to move. "We have to go," Clara said, making the decision Vincent had prepared her for. The tunnel now. She grabbed the bag Vincent had packed. Water, first aid, spare ammunition, documents for their fake identities, and led Sophie to the back of the panic room. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall, and Clara's hands shook so badly she almost couldn't work the mechanism. The tunnel was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for an adult. Clara had to crawl with Sophie pressed close behind her, the bag dragging behind them. She could hear smoke alarms shrieking above them, could smell the acrid scent of something burning. "Not again," her mind screamed. "Please, not again." They emerged in the barn 50 yards from the house. Clara hauled Sophie out and looked back to see flames already consuming the first floor of the farmhouse. Her heart stopped. Vincent was still in there. She could see muzzle flashes in the upstairs windows, could hear the continued sound of gunfire. "We have to help him," Sophie sobbed, trying to pull away from Clara's grip. "We can't," Clara started, but the words died in her throat, because suddenly Vincent was there, bursting out of the barn's side entrance, bleeding from a cut above his eye but alive, moving fast. Behind him came two of Carmine's men, and Vincent turned and fired without breaking stride, dropping both of them with lethal precision. "Run!" he shouted, and Clara didn't question, didn't hesitate. She grabbed Sophie's hand and ran toward the tree line, hearing Vincent's footsteps pounding behind them. More shots. Clara felt something whip past her head, heard Vincent curse. She risked a glance back and saw him stumbling, blood blooming on his shoulder. But he kept running, kept moving, his face set in determined lines. They made it to the trees just as the farmhouse's propane tank exploded, sending a fireball into the pre-dawn sky. The blast wave knocked them all to the ground, and Clara covered Sophie with her body, feeling heat wash over them. When she looked up, Vincent was on his feet again, his gun raised, scanning for threats. Blood ran down his arm, but his hands were steady. In that moment, Clara saw both versions of him: the gentleman who made breakfast and read bedtime stories, and the killer who'd survived 2 decades in a world of monsters. "Keep moving," he said, his voice strained. "They'll regroup. We need to reach the extraction point." They moved through the forest in a nightmare blur. Clara's lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she kept going, kept pulling Sophie along. Vincent covered their rear, occasionally stopping to fire at pursuers Clara couldn't see. The 3 miles to Marco's team felt like 30. When they finally broke through the trees to find 2 black SUVs waiting with armed men she vaguely recognized from Vincent's New York security team, Clara nearly collapsed with relief. Vincent was already barking orders, his command voice back in full force as he orchestrated their escape. As they drove away from the burning ruins of their peaceful life, Clara held Sophie close and watched Vincent in the front seat, his shoulder being bandaged by one of the men, his face hard and cold. "Is he gone?" Sophie whispered. "The Vincent from before. Is he back?" Clara looked at the man she loved and saw the truth. Vincent Moretti had never really left. He'd just been sleeping, waiting for the moment when his family needed the monster to protect them. "He's here when we need him," Clara said quietly. "But he's still our Vincent too. Both things can be true." They drove for hours, eventually reaching a private airfield where a plane waited. As they lifted off, leaving New Zealand and their dreams of peace behind, Vincent came to sit beside Clara. He took her hand, his touch gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I thought I could protect you from this. I thought I could be different." Clara squeezed his hand. "You are different. The old Vincent Moretti would have gone to war without thinking about the cost. You tried to build peace first, that matters. But I failed." "No." Clara turned to face him fully, making sure he saw the truth in her eyes. "You showed Sophie what it looks like to try to be better. You showed her that fighting isn't the only option, even if sometimes it's the necessary one. That's not failure, Vincent. That's being human." Vincent pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair. "I love you," he whispered. "God help me. I love you both so much." "We love you too," Clara said. "Monster and man. All of you." Behind them, Sophie was sleeping, exhausted by trauma and fear, and ahead of them, Marco was coordinating with Vincent's remaining network to track down Carmine and end this threat permanently. They were going back to war, back to the world Vincent had tried to leave, but they were going together, as a family, as people who had learned that love didn't make you weak, it made you strong enough to fight for what mattered. The plane carried them east as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that looked nothing like fire. And Clara held Vincent's hand and Sophie's hand and thought about the vows they'd planned to take in 2 weeks. Promises about better and worse, sickness and health, till death do us part. They would still take those vows, she decided. When this was over, when Carmine was no longer a threat, they would stand in whatever home they managed to build and promise themselves to each other, because the fire had tried to destroy them twice now, but they had survived, scarred and changed, but still standing. And sometimes survival was its own kind of victory.